Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of Monbiosis. And today we're talking about, well, yet another issue which is massively neglected in most of the media, and this is chemical overload, the sheer volume and diversity of synthetic chemicals which are hammering ecosystems, hammering our life support systems, and doing, well, who knows what to our own bodies. Now, we've heard something about plastics and the impact of those, and the impact can be very grave indeed, but that's just one aspect of this chemical overload, just one aspect of this great flood of synthetic chemicals, which has been rising at extraordinary speed. And I'm very fortunate to have with me three of the world's leading experts in this absolutely crucial but greatly neglected subject. I've got Lynn Persson, Miriam Diamond, and Patricia Villarrubia Gomez. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us today. And I'm going to start by asking you each, who you are, what you do, and what your speciality in this particular field is. So, Professor Miriam, if I could start with you, tell me something about you and your work.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you. Very exciting. I'm a professor at University of Toronto, where I've been professing since 1991. My work looks at chemical contaminants, starting at the sources where they come from, like products. For example, the phone, the computer that we're on. Looking at emissions and looking at how chemicals get into us and into the environment.
Thank you. And Lynn Persson, tell us about your work, which is very much at the international level.
Thank you, George, and thank you from my side also for inviting us to talk here today. We are very eager to speak more about these issues, as you can understand. So I'm currently working at the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation as head of the international department. I have my background is in research. I spent most of my working time at a research institute. I'm an environmental chemist, but I also have a training in political science. So I've ended up doing research on the political science of chemicals, you could say. And I worked a lot with chemicals management, primarily in low-income countries. But I've also followed the international negotiations between countries when it comes to chemicals management.
Thank you. And Patricia, tell us about your expertise in this subject.
Yeah, again, also thank you very much for inviting me. I am a PhD candidate at the Stockholm Resilience Center, Stockholm University, and my background is in natural science, but I'm researching plastic pollution at the global scale from the science, policy, and citizen interface. So I'm combining natural science with social science.
Thank you. So to stay with you for the time being, Patricia,
Yeah.
you mentioned plastics as obviously being an absolutely crucial issue, but plastics are just one group of the very many chemicals which have been released. Tell us something about the number of synthetic chemicals we're now facing and the speed with which that number has been growing.
So if we attend to plastic pollution, plastics are made up of approximately 10,000 different chemicals. But there are one of our co-authors, one of our colleagues on the paper that we are talking today about, had previous research saying that there are more than 350,000 different chemicals. So it's not only about the ones that compound plastic, but it's also the ones that are around ourselves, and they are counting from the hundred thousands that we know of. But maybe this is not the absolute amount because we need more information.
So, Miriam, this remarkable number of synthetic chemicals being released into the environment, we scarcely know how many there are, but what's a likely impact of that on our bodies, on living systems?
We know so little about the majority of chemicals. It's actually it's actually staggering to appreciate our lack of knowledge about the impact of most of the chemicals that are either in commerce or in production. We know a lot about very few chemicals. So those chemicals, the endocrine disruptors, for example, the effects are of concern. So let me paint the picture of what that concern looks like. The concern, for example, can be reduced reproductive success, reduced sperm count. So there's studies showing reduced sperm count that are associated with exposure to some of the chemicals that we know mechanistically can cause that effect. Another aspect is neurobehavioral toxicity or effects. Neurobehavioral effects, they are so common today amongst kids and young adults, and frankly, some older adults too. Those effects are everything that range from, for example, attention deficit disorder, type behaviors, anxiety, autism spectrum disorders. Probably many of the people listening to this will be able to identify somebody they know that may not be able to reach their potential because of these behavioral effects. Are the chemicals the only cause? No. Can they exacerbate a condition? Yes. That's what the literature is showing, but for very few chemicals. Now, that's just to mention just a few of the effects on the human population, not to mention the effects on aquatic ecosystems, terrestrial ecosystems. The effects, unfortunately, are widespread and of concern.
So, Lynn, can you fill us in a bit about some more information on those likely effects on terrestrial and aquatic and marine ecosystems?
Yeah, I think in general for ecosystems, it's a great concern that the chemical pollution levels that we have today can actually affect biodiversity. And as we know, we are seeing large mass extinctions of species already today, which has several different causes, right? It's also about changes in land use and so on. But chemical pollution tend to be yet another perturbation to these ecosystems, which may then in the end contribute to large changes in these systems as we know them.
And so we have this, I mean, it's an extraordinary situation, isn't it, Patricia? That we've got this tsunami of synthetic chemicals, and yet hardly anyone is talking about them except for plastic. There's some discussion about plastic. I mean, why isn't this front and center of public discussion?
Well, to me, it's very staggering of how little we talk about problems like such as chemical pollution or climate change, and how much importance we give to other non-life-threatening matters as we are experiencing these days. And the activist in me wants to believe that it's because of political pressure or companies' pressure on not looking into these into these problems. But yeah, this is my personal belief, and it may not be represent the think of the rest of my colleagues here. But I think it's also convenience. It's not as useful and funny, let's say that funny, to not talk about these problems, because we have so many other problems, and this is actually life-threatening at the species level. So I don't know. I really don't understand, and the person, my eco anxiety, do not understand why we are not talking about these problems more often, and we are not giving more importance to these kind of conversations.
It is an extraordinary thing, isn't it? I mean, you know, one celebrity slaps another and it is world news for days and days. And here we're facing one of several potentially existential crises, aren't we? And it's like most people never even heard of it.
I
And part of, so sorry, yeah, carry on.
I believe that this particular matter that you're talking about had more media coverage than all climate change for years. This is the kind of like I do not understand why or how.
I mean, in a way, it's like, it is the trivia that is stopping us. It's the trivia which is that huge obstacle. I mean, it's tiny, but it's huge, and it just stands in the way of public understanding. And Lynn, I mean, part of what we're looking at here is all these existential threats coming together at the same time, isn't it? I mean, it's not just that we're being hammered by synthetic chemicals, not just that we're being hammered by climate breakdown, by ecological breakdown, by soil, by fresh water, by all these other things, but these things in conjunction with each other. I mean, do we have any idea of what those combined effects might look like?
Yeah, I think we have ideas, but it's of course difficult. I mean, on a system level to assess all these joint pressures. But what we can say is, of course, that we're always worse off with several stressors than if we had only one, and it will reduce our possibilities for finding a plan B, let's say. Um, yeah.
Perhaps I could jump
And
in
Miriam,
and
I mean, sorry, carry on.
perhaps
Yeah,
I could jump in and say that
yeah.
there's an exacerbation. So some of these chemicals, for example, affect immune function, which renders you more susceptible to illness and disease. Now, add on top of that heat stress or high heat variability brought on by climate change, and you see the compounding effect. So this influences wild species, but you know what? It also influences human species. It influences our resilience, our ability to carry on. One other adverse effect that we should mention is actually a reduction in IQ and a reduction in your ability to problem solve. What a terrible conundrum to think that as we face very challenging, difficult problems, some of us are being rendered not quite as smart as we could have been because of exposure to some toxic chemicals.
Now that's a really terrifying thought, isn't it? That it's a self-reinforcing issue. That the more we're exposed to these threats, the less capable we are of dealing with them, and therefore the more we're likely to be exposed to them. Now, Lynn, you've been looking at international efforts, such as they are, to control synthetic chemicals. How would you describe the state of those discussions and negotiations?
They've really been terribly slow. And I think here again, you were talking before about the challenges in communicating issues around chemical pollution, for instance. And I think these aspects that we've been discussing now, that there are so many chemicals and that there are so many different possible effects. This is difficult when you communicate, but it also makes it difficult, maybe more difficult at the governance side, let's say, when you want to deal with the issue, because the chemical pollution involves every sector and so much different legislation. So it's not a situation where countries can go in and decide, okay, we will now do this one thing and that will fix the problem. You need to get in place sort of basic chemicals management in all countries, and this involves massive, many different pieces of legislation, and it demands great coordination between government offices of different specializations, for instance, which is very difficult in many countries with smaller governments and small government budgets, right? So I think. But in general, it has been really, really slow, and we have a few quite successful agreements in the fields of chemicals, but these are, for one group of chemicals or a handful, then compared to the 350,000 that we have on the market. So we have a lot of work to do there, both internationally together as an international community, but also nationally in many countries that still need to get basic chemicals management in place.
Listening to what you're saying there, I mean, it sounds like this is almost too big and complex and diverse a problem for governments to deal with.
No, people are amazing. We could do it if we want to do, but you have to give it priority, and that's the problem, I think. If it's not given priority, we can't do it. If we prioritize, we can go to the moon, but we need to prioritize these issues. That's important for all of us.
And while we fail to do that, Patricia, this tide of chemicals is rising. I mean, the speed of it is extraordinary, isn't it? The proliferation of new synthetic chemicals that we know nothing about.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And hopefully, hopefully we get to have a hold on this topic soon, and urgent action is put in place. But yeah, otherwise the expectation is that the curve keep growing and growing over the next decades. Yeah.
And why do you think, Patricia, that the only group we've paid any attention to really is plastics?
Well, I think that in the case of plastics, it's something very visual, and it's different to other kinds of chemicals, because plastics are, as I said before, it's a compound of many different chemicals together, but it's something that we see in a solid phase, and it's something that we are using and are able to see in our everyday life, and they are left away, like behind ourselves as waste. But it's also something that is very useful in our daily life. So I think that it's a type of pollution that we can really see, and it's very visual, and it's very visual, and the problem is visual. In the case of other chemicals, they are laying on the ground, they are on the atmosphere. It's something that we cannot tangible see. And in the case of plastic, it's something that is just also raising the speed of their production. It's just exponentially increasing. They have increased 79% over the past almost 20 years, 15, 20 years. And they are expected to grow in a 30% more over the next 5 years. So what we mean is that in the case of plastic, it's something that we see, and we keep growing, seeing them very rapidly.
Yeah. So we've been talking in quite general terms about chemical overload, but let's get specific for a moment. I'm going to ask each of you in turn, starting with you, Patricia. I'll stay with you for a moment. To name your least favourite chemical. In other words, the one that worries you most, and why that might be. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I think that, and one that probably many people have heard of, it's bisphenol A or PFAS, like these two different ones. And to me, they are like bisphenol A. It's something that it worries me a lot. And the group of bisphenol is not just like bisphenol A. It has a C, a D, it has many different ones. And it was created, it was man-made, created to be an contraceptive additive. And it didn't work out very well. And we now use it on plastic to make it flexible and firm. And it's something that we have around, and it's something that potentially it's impacting the reproduction capacity of organisms, humans included, and it's everywhere. And that's something that really concerns me because of my age.
Miriam, what would you nominate as your scariest chemical?
For me, the current scariest chemicals are those that Patricia mentioned, per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances, or PFAS, or the forever chemicals. They're scariest for me because they are so persistent. They are incredibly persistent. They're used in over 200 classes of applications. That's not the applications, that's just the classes of applications. They're used so pervasively, we don't even know how pervasively they're used. We're highly exposed. For North Americans, virtually 100% of the population has PFAS in our bodies, in our blood. A few of them are well known, and those few have very concerning adverse health effects, including effects on the immune system. Metabolic dysregulation, which can lead to, for example, type 2 diabetes, that can lead to, for example, weight gain, reproductive effects, some cancers. It's such a wide range of adverse effects. They are so deeply embedded in all our products, in commerce, in the way we do things, that it's going to be very, very challenging to remove them. And just to be very perverse, I mean, I don't know about you, but I love hiking and I love going out into the wilderness because it clears my mind. And there I am with my PFAS rain jacket, putting up my PFAS-coated tent with PFAS-coated strings and my waterproof PFAS boots. So it's just totally wrong. And that's an illustration of how pervasive they are, from the Arctic to the Antarctic and every place between.
Lynn, what would you nominate as your scary chemical
Well,
number one?
well, I have one, but now Miriam made me think of my favorite sport is cross-country skiing, and there we have fluorinated substances in the, you know, what you put under the skis for a good grip. Oh, that's also very sad. Anyways, but I wanted to give you as my most scary chemical is the unknown unknown. So this is the chemical problem that we don't even know, that we don't know about. I think that's the scariest part, that we produce, I mean, we invent new synthetic chemicals every day as a global community. There are new substances coming out and they are generally not risk assessed at all. And then there is this risk that we are actually today using and producing something that will give us a big surprise, maybe even at the planetary scale, like we saw with the hole in the ozone layer, or that we see today with climate change, right? Because this is also chemicals in the atmosphere. So I think this is the scariest part for me, that we have that something that we're using today may cause an effect on some of our vital Earth system processes, and that we're not aware of, or maybe to human health or something like that. But it's this with the unknown unknowns that scares me the most.
Now, Lynn, just then you said these chemicals are produced without being risk assessed. How can that possibly be true?
Yeah, it's a good question. But you know, when we at the point when we started to risk assess chemicals, we had already produced and used many chemicals for many years, and we're just not keeping up. We are risk assessing only a fraction of all the chemicals that we use, and legislation is very different in different countries, demanding different things from new chemicals on the market. In the EU now, there are quite strict regulations in some respects, but in other regions of the world, you can put new substances on the market without assessing safety or risk of these chemicals.
I mean, that Patricia, just seems just the most rash and irresponsible policy that we could possibly undergo, that we're releasing these chemicals. We have absolutely no idea what some of them might do. And as Lynn says, you know, we're looking about potentially completely unknown impacts. I mean, that is completely the opposite of the precautionary principle, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and how have they got away with this? How is it possible that this has happened?
I think that just to include to one of my answers before, I think that this is such a complex and systemic problem that it's not it's that it's hard to understand, and like and getting research about absolutely everything, it's complicated but not impossible. So we need to create willingness to know about this and to research more, and absolutely before getting a new chemical into production and released to the environment and within the environment people, these things should be clear. What are the ecotoxicological impacts and the ecotoxicological impacts both in ecosystems and people?
And on the planet.
put in place
Don't
before
forget
we
the
leave them.
planet.
No, on the planet. No, yeah. Well, Lynn, when I see ecosystems are like the whole planet. It's that's how I see it. Like the whole is from system. Like we need system thinking. It's not like we need to forget about this linear idea that we produce and we throw away. No, absolutely everything is connected, and we need system thinking to understand the problematic and to be able to regulate properly, not just have like quick fix solutions that will afterwards are going to impact us probably even worse than the previous one.
Perhaps I might add,
And Miriam, what
yeah,
sign is there that we're getting anywhere in that direction? Is there any move on the part of global governments to start regulating these chemicals properly?
yeah, perhaps I might add that in high income countries, we have a substantial infrastructure dedicated to chemicals management. Now, part of that infrastructure requires a very high burden of proof before action is taken. Much higher burden of proof than, for example, just getting the chemical to market. But it's more complex than that yet. So much of the chemical production has left high-income countries towards low and middle-income countries. Some countries have enacted legislation. China, for example, is enacting legislation. But there are other countries that host considerable production capacity that have very limited risk assessment. But they're the workshops of the world. We are buying those products. When I say we, I'm talking about for myself in Canada, a high-income country, high standard of living. We're keeping that production going because we buy those products. We've created pollution havens. Global governance is very challenging, and Lynn can speak more to this and has. Global governance is a complex, difficult system full of, just as national governance is, vested interests, compounded by, at least for chemicals management, we have complex supply chains, very complex. So it's very difficult to even know which chemical is in which product that has been made in numerous different countries. We're talking about really complex interactions. But I think the way forward is to recognize this and to start moving towards an idea of sufficiency, that we can't just keep growing and using all sorts of new products, new gizmos, satisfy ourselves with short-term convenience at the expense of long-term human population health and ecosystem health.
And Lynn, to get there, what sort of international framework do we need that we don't currently have?
Well, actually, I was thinking now when you were talking, is there hope? And I think in February this year, the UN Environment Organization met, and they actually managed to get a few really important decisions, I think, out of that meeting. And one of them is that the countries decided to start negotiating an internationally binding agreement on plastic. So trying to tackle the plastic together as an international community, and that is really important. Of course, it's a long way to go, and it's always slow when many countries work together. But on the other hand, it's the only way we have to go, I think. It's really important that countries do this together also, so as Patricia was saying, it's one planet and it's all one system by now. So we really need to get everybody on board as well. So that's one thing, the plastic deal. But there was also another decision on continuing the work together on chemicals and waste. Which, it's the start, and you will have to see how it develops and so on. But I think there is a willingness from countries to work together on these issues, and that's really important. I think in these times, the multilateralism is more needed than ever, and I'm very grateful that they managed to get these decisions through at that meeting. So let's continue to work and hope that we can improve more rapidly than we've done before.
Patricia, is there any country in particular which is doing very well on this and is trying to drive more active measures?
Well, regarding plastics, the UNEA resolution have been pushed through, apart from the United Nations, Europe, Peru, and Nigeria, I think it was, right? Sorry, right now the names are bumbling in my head. But the most important thing right now is that this 174 countries from the United Nations has anonymously said that we have to tackle this and we have to create a joint and together uh, action if we want to solve and we want to manage this problem. And plastic is not just a marine pollution problem, it's a planet problem. And I would like to say that I keep hearing that plastic is a distraction to other environmental problems. To me, the way I see plastic is within all environmental problems, because plastic pollution links to climate change, biodiversity loss, nutrient degradation. So it's not, we don't have, again, system thinking. We have to look at this problem from many different points of view and not just like a marine pollution one and a waste problem. We have to see it within major environmental problems because they are all connected. It's not like apart.
And Miriam, to finish us off, what is it going to take to get people aware of this massive issue and what needs to be done about it?
So I'd like to add that the work that we've done together, we've been the first group to come out and say that we have transgressed, we've gone beyond the planetary boundary for chemical pollution, that work is required, urgent work is required. We have come out in favor of placing a hard cap on chemical production. So a hard cap means that the earth can accommodate only a fixed amount of chemicals being produced and emitted. It cannot keep going on forever. We're on that forever trajectory right now for chemicals and plastics. Not sustainable. We have to have a hard cap, just as we have a hard cap for carbon dioxide in order to try to limit climate change. I think this is it's a lofty goal, and we need lots of energy to get there. Expertise from, for example, Lynn and Patricia and all our colleagues. But work has to start on figuring out how to implement a hard cap at a global scale. But what I would like to say, and I said it earlier, is that we have to think about sufficiency and not growth. We have to think of quality of life and how quality of life can be delivered in a very meaningful way without a lot of materials and products and just working to have money to buy more stuff. So that's my plea. That's my hope. And that's where I think we're going to go. That we'll be satisfied, that we'll have enough, that we can gain pleasure out of life without all the stuff around us.
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Miriam and Lynn and Patricia. That was a really great discussion. And I would urge everyone watching this, please, don't let us neglect this issue any longer. I know there's a huge amount to think about out there. I know we keep getting distracted. I know there's a lot going on in the world, but this is about us, and this is about everything we love and value. So sorry to load this on you, but here's yet another issue to worry about, yet another issue to lobby about, yet another issue to protest about. And that is where hope lies, through mobilization. Thank you.